You're watching ZBM TV9, Bermuda.
The content of tonight's program is sensitive as we discuss the topic of child sexual abuse. Viewer discretion is advised. SCAR's mission is to reduce the risk of child sexual abuse by raising public awareness and speaking to key decision makers to put policies and procedures in place that best protect our children from the crime of child sexual abuse. We do this by prevention and awareness programs, an adult training program, and we provide resources for healing such as psychiatric care, spiritual support, and the list of agencies available to help. Now let's go live in Studio A.
I've been told that I am the product of rape. This means sexual abuse really began for me at birth. It also means that I wasn't conceived from beautiful consensual love. I was conceived out of sexual violation. I am also a survivor of sexual abuse at the hands of a male babysitter and an older female child. My first experience with sex was when I was 9 years old. The male babysitter who inappropriately touched me in my private areas was also a family friend. His inappropriate touch made me feel disgusted, confused, scared, and ugly. The older female child was larger than I. She made me do things that I was not comfortable with. And the only thing that I understood was that it felt good. I thought it was my fault because I liked it. Because of my first experience with sex, I suffered serious insecurities and self-esteem issues as a young child. I had a complex about my looks. I felt ugly, so I believed I was ugly. This was compounded by being teased and called freckle face as a child. In order to feel accepted, to feel loved, to feel pretty, I started doing things that were unhealthy. Eating disorder, promiscuous behavior, dressing inappropriately to attract attention to myself. And then in 2004, as a parent, I had to deal with this again. The cycle continued by a trusted family member. That was the darkest year of my life. When my family started going through the prosecutory process, it was like opening a Pandora's box wide open. As I started to share details about our experience, people began telling me about their abuse, as well as their children's abuse, and how our society wanted it to be kept quiet. Because of my strong faith in God, I was empowered to come out of my own world and my own pain and shame and realize that child sexual abuse was an epidemic in our society, and SCARS was born. My name is Debbie Ray Rivers, and I am the founder and the executive director of SCARS, the acronym for Saving Children and Revealing Secrets. This charity was started because I was hearing secrets of how children were abused and adults failed to protect them, how adults chose to cover the secret to protect their reputation over openly confronting what was going on in their homes and in their organizations. We have a society filled with angry and hurt adults and adolescents who have had to live with secrets which hold pain, shame, and trauma of sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse spans over 3 generations in my family. I understand the pain, and I have seen the impact firsthand. This pain can cause you to blame yourself, especially if you've been told it was your fault and that you liked it. It can cause you to hate your body, especially when your body has been violated. It may cause you to mistrust people if it was someone who was in a position of trust. This pain can cause you to question your faith if the abuser was somebody who goes to church and professes they know God. It can cause sadness and guilt if the child disclosed and they weren't believed. And this pain causes brokenness in families. The sexual abuse of a child can be the deepest pain because it is inflicted early and because it involves people who should have been trustworthy. Where do we think pain goes when a child has been sexually abused? This pain can grow into bitterness, hatred, guilt, shame, depression, abandonment, low self-esteem, anger, and insecurities of all kinds. We have seen and heard too many stories from adults whose pain was numbed by alcohol, drug addiction, food, anger, sex, self-loathing, and even some thoughts of suicide. What does a child really understand about sex? Sex should be between 2 consenting adults. Sex should be intimate, not forced. It should be beautiful, not scary, and it should be special, not confusing. When children are sexually abused, their minds and their emotions can be tremendously damaged. To be childlike is to be innocent, pure, free from doubt, trusting. But when children are sexually abused, they lose their innocence, they lose purity, and they lose trust. Children are placed in our care, and our job and responsibility is to love them, teach them about their bodies, and keep them safe from harm, not abuse them. Whether we call it sexual assault, sexual abuse, rape, unlawful carnal knowledge, interfering, we must recognize that it is a crime against children, and it can affect the life of a child into their adulthood. I like to think of children as a gift from God. What do we do with gifts? We don't abuse them. We don't take them for granted. We don't throw them away. We shouldn't give them away. We cherish them. We appreciate them. We care about them. We take care of them. We protect them. We nurture them. And we love them. We must, as a community, do everything we can to save our children from this crime. And when this crime occurs, we must get the sadness, the anger, and the hurt out of their hearts. One of the things that I have learned is that we have to step out of denial and recognize that this crime exists. Our laws need to be strengthened by having tougher penalties, and it is vital that organizations entrusted with the care of our children talk about this, discuss it, address it, and prevent it. We must provide and mandate sex offender treatment and management programs for offenders, because if we don't, children will be left unprotected, and offenders will be set up to fail and subsequently reoffend. SCAR stands for Saving Children and Revealing Secrets, and scars are the after effects of some pain, but they can also be the evidence of battles which we have fought and won. The stories you are about to hear are difficult, but they are important, because we must understand what the sexual desires and selfish actions of others do to our precious children. Although the faces are hidden and the voices are changed, the pain is real. Children are meant to be loved, to be cherished and protected, not scarred.
Good evening. I'm Danielle Revere, your host for tonight. Thank you for joining us. And please join us for the next 3 Mondays as we hear firsthand stories about the impact of child sexual abuse. We'll hear from advocates who are promoting how we can get involved in the solutions. And we'll also hear about how the system can change and how we can be a part of that change. Tonight's show features stories from survivors, their families, and we'll also be joined on the panel with 2 local psychologists who will help us to understand the impact of child sexual abuse on our community. For tonight's show, there will be no call-ins. Up next, we have a very hard-hitting story about a survivor who has had to endure incestuous relationships, and we expect nothing more than for you to be touched by these stories.
I am a survivor of incest. My father was the one that took my virginity. I was 10 years old, but my memory goes back further. It was the leading up to that experience. From a child's perspective, when it first happened, it started with him coming into my room that I shared with my siblings. And it would be dark, and I would know he would be there, so I would pretend I would be sleeping when he would touch me in ways that made me comfortable and stiffen up, or I would breathe heavy or pretend that I would be sleeping without reacting to the touches that were uncomfortable. But it left me with feeling butterflies and just nerves. There were times when my sister would catch him over my bed and would just shout at him, going off the fact that she was older. And the following day I would hear her mention to my mom, and I would just hear my mom comment. Her reaction would be, he's going after my children now that he can't get me. And so as time progressed, another memory I have was when I was 8. It would be my turn to do the dinner, supper dishes, washing up. And he would wait until everyone was in the room where we would watch TV. And he would check to make sure everybody was in tune to what was going on, and knowing that I would be alone, would come up behind me, sneak up behind me, and touch me in ways that were not appropriate. And then when he would hear footsteps, he'll distance himself away from me, pretending that he was doing something else in the kitchen. And as a child, I knew I felt uncomfortable, but I didn't understand why I was uncomfortable. So one day when my mom was asleep, my daddy had asked me to make him a peanut butter sandwich and bring it to him outside where he was working. So, of course, I did what he asked, and he was very militant, so I did what he asked. So I walked to where he was, and that's when my innocence was taken. I knew that it hurt where I screamed out loud, and then my mom heard my scream and came out, but by that time my daddy had told me to be quiet, because if my mom found out what he was doing, she would just be mad that he was doing it to me and not to her. So with that, I kept quiet, and after the pain left, it didn't hurt anymore. And so I asked him, is it okay for me to like it? And he said yes. So, of course, I allowed what was happening to happen. So after he was finished, I went back and returned to the house, and the first room would be the kitchen where my mom was. And she asked me where I was, and I was afraid to say where I was. And so she looked down and saw that my pants were wet, and she asked me if I had wet my pants. And I said yes, because I was afraid, because I didn't know what to do or how she would react or what was wrong. I just knew something was wrong. And she looked down again and she says, no, you didn't wet your pants, that's something else. And it was at that point she had called me dirty. You're a dirty little girl, and just told me to go in the bathroom and wash myself. So it was her telling me that I was dirty that I instantly felt guilty and ashamed for the pleasure that I felt but didn't understand. So I went into my room and I laid down and I cried, and it was at that point and thinking and saying, no, whatever was that happened wasn't supposed to happen for my mom to call me dirty. And I cried, and I didn't like my parents even more for that, and I screamed in my pillow. So over the years, due to my mom going and sharing the embarrassment and shame that I already felt, the fact that she never asked me how I felt or never told me that it wasn't my fault, and the fact that she stayed with my daddy, I really felt that it was me. I felt dirty, I felt insecure. I didn't have the confidence that normal children would have, because I never knew what I was coming home to or when he would try and touch me again. So when I would go to school, because of the gossip that our society had, and perhaps that is why things were always silent, because I know it's prevalent in Bermuda, because I've talked to other victims or survivors who would share and relate to me only when that trust is there.
I grew up in the picture-perfect family. I was called the debutante Miss America. I was the first Miss America that they ever brought a family up on stage. My father continued to sexually violate children and teenagers until he died at age 75.
And that's what I feel that was taken from me. My virginity, my youth. You're never the same after that.
What I've heard from people who abuse often is that all the signs were there, but no one bothered to ask them about it.
We have to understand that doing the right thing is not doing the easy thing.
Law enforcement is never going to investigate their way out of these type of crimes, these crimes against children. It's only through prevention that we can help stem the tide.
I feel I had to free myself from feeling guilty, feeling responsible, like I was dirty, who would want me, it's all these things are in your head.
How could somebody do this to me and care about me in any way, shape, or form, I really must be nothing.
And that's what I feel that was taken from me. My virginity, my youth. You're never the same after that.
We have to understand that doing the right thing is not doing the easy thing.
Law enforcement is never going to investigate their way out of these type of crimes, these crimes against children. It's only through prevention that we can help.
This portion of Scars has been brought to you by Ace Foundation Bermuda. Now let's join Danielle Riviere in Studio A.
I grew up not with being fake, pretty much hiding my true emotions. And as I got to the age of where it was okay to be intimate, I was very promiscuous, because in order for me to feel that I can enjoy sex that is naturally experienced in a healthy way with a healthy relationship, man and woman, I thought that by being with man would be a way of me showing that it was okay to. And when I really did become emotional or connected to a boyfriend, I found that because I went from something being pleasurable, an experience that's supposed to be pleasurable, it became where that innocence or the guilt of that pleasure was suppressed, where I would not enjoy that experience that should have been enjoyed. And it led to me being in abusive relationships or with men that did not know love. And because I was seeking love and not having had the healing that I needed, I ended up pregnant myself. One occasion, the principal in my primary school had asked me, was there any problem in my home? And I was afraid to say the truth, because back then we were taught to keep our business to ourselves because our community is so small. So most of my life I had learned to be an introvert even after I had healed, because our society is one that the help causes you to feel like a victim again in the abuse that they have in gossiping. When you help a child's family, or if my mom used to seek help for food as well, because my daddy was also abusive and not wanting to give her money. So she would go to neighbors for help. And instead of the neighbor looking at it as a blessing, of course they would share with another neighbor, oh, you know, I had to help her with eggs. She didn't even have eggs to feed her children. So that shame was done again, but in a different way. So I think that our society needs to reach the space of when you give help to those in need, when you give help to a vulnerable woman who is crushed in broken spirit and they share in their vulnerability to you, it's important for you to learn what it is, to keep it between you and that person that is seeking your help. Because when you go and you share with someone else, whether it be done in confidence or not, it gets out and then you shame that person again. And so what you have is a broken spirit twice. Because I was an introvert, and because I felt that with the low self-esteem, the confusions that I've had, through the abuse that I had suffered for so many years, I hadn't broken these cycles. So it took me at least 24 years of my life to go through the extensive counseling that was needed, and then through God helping me, because even with God, you have to allow God to heal you where you're broken. You have to allow God to show you where you need the healing, and you have to allow God to give you the confidence through the healing that He can give you, along with the resources that are out there like Scars and other agencies that had to help me break that cycle. And even now I become conscious of when I fall into a trap of being used, because as a victim, transferring over and wanting to transfer it over to survival, to a survivor where you can give a testimony, it means that you have to be conscious to know that you are loved and that it wasn't your fault, number one. And the thing that I would like to say to victims, to brothers and sisters, because it's not just women that have been abused and violated in the way that I have, I want them to know that First, it's not your fault. Rather, you have a mother or father that is there to support you. I want you to know that you can rise above. You cannot worry. It's not about people and what they think. It all has to do with you seeking the help, wanting the help, knowing that it's not your fault. It's the first step in getting the help that you need. I am a testimony. I no longer look at myself as a victim. I had to learn through the counseling, the tools that I had learned that what love is and what love is not. So I was able to get myself from victim mentality by allowing God to guide me to also learn that you can't just expect for people to help you. You have to first help yourself, and the only way you can do that is through your healing process. Forgive those that have hurt you, because you have one life to live. If you went through hell as a child, why do you want to die that way? No one can control your emotions but yourself. The first thing you have to do is forgive yourself for feeling guilty for the pleasures that you experienced as a child. It was not your fault. I am here to tell you that it is not your fault. It was never your fault. Whoever it was that violated your innocence.
That is a hard story to hear. Please remember that we have had to distort the voices to protect the identity of those who have shared their stories. So tonight on our panel, we have Dr. Eleni Belavanecki as well as Dr. Darian Ray. Thank you very much for joining us. So just tell us briefly about yourselves.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm a forensic consultant forensic psychologist from the UK. I have been in Bermuda for about a year. I have worked both with perpetrators of sexual abuse and survivors of sexual abuse, mainly in the UK, but also in some parts of Africa with the organization Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me as well. I'm so glad to be here. I'm a Bermuda registered psychologist, and I work with children, I work with families, I work with kids and adults of all ages for all different types of reasons.
Thank you both for joining us today. My first question is, why do people commit child sexual abuse? That's what everyone wants to know. What makes a person do this type of crime? Dr. Eleni.
It's a difficult question because the causes of sexual abuse are as widespread and as varied as the types of sexual abuse, and we are aware that sexual abuse has many different types and takes many different forms. Many people think that it's just sexual attraction to children, what we call sexual deviance, but in fact it's only a very small percentage of people who are sexually deviant. The majority of sexual abuse happens because people want to be in control. There's a huge desire to dominate, and they want to assert themselves over the victims. So these are the main reasons that we see with perpetrators.
And I think it's also important to note something that Debbie mentioned in her speech, which I was really glad to kind of hear her talk about her story, that society has kind of created this idea that the sexual abuser is typically somebody who's, dangerous or creepy looking or scary, when the reality is that most times they're people that we know, they're people that we trust. Most children know their abusers. And I think it's, kind of difficult for them because they know they're abusers.
So what makes us as a community, we often talk about the fact that people are known. And within this story, we heard that the family was aware. So what makes someone not tell? Why don't we as a community reach out and tell these stories?
There's lots of different reasons. Fear, sometimes, and also because people are not, they're ashamed. Sexual abuse is something that people think that they should be ashamed of. If you had a child that had been a victim of physical abuse or some injury, and they had a broken arm, for example, you would immediately take them to the hospital, you would demand that they have treatment, you wouldn't try to hide it from anybody, you would never say to your child, go into your room and never tell anybody that you have broken your arm. So we have to think about why we respond differently to emotional injury, because this is what sexual abuse is, it's emotional injury, and we respond very differently.
Mm-hmm. And just to kind of chime in on that point. I think that it's important also to realize that, like I said, a lot of people know their abusers, including families. So when families kind of hear about this, they're kind of torn. On the one hand, they have this person that they cherish, that they care about, and a lot of times that they respect in the community or just within the family. On the other hand, they understand that this thing has been done, and or they've heard that this thing has been done, and a lot of times they don't want to believe that somebody that they respect, that they understand, that does so many great things with their children sometimes, can be capable of something like this. So it's the most natural thing for a human to be scared of something like this, and to kind of try and avoid it in any way possible, and say to themselves that it didn't happen.
Thank you very much. We'll be right back after this short break.
I grew up in the picture-perfect family. I was called the debutante Miss America. I was the first Miss America that they ever brought a family up on stage. My father continued to sexually violate children and teenagers until he died at age 75.
And that's what I feel that was taken from me. My virginity, my youth. You're never the same after that.
What I've heard from people who abuse often is that all the signs were there, but no one bothered to ask them about it.
We have to understand that doing the right thing is not doing the easy thing.
Law enforcement is never going to investigate their way out of these type of crimes, these crimes against children. It's only through prevention that we can help stem the tide.
I feel I had to free myself from feeling guilty, feeling responsible, like I was dirty, who would want me, it's all these things are in your head.
How could somebody do this to me and care about me in any way, shape, or form? I really must be nothing.
And that's what I feel that was taken from me. My virginity, my youth. You're never the same after that.
We have to understand that doing the right thing is not doing the easy thing.
Law enforcement is never going to investigate their way out of these type of crimes, these crimes against children. It's only through prevention that we can help.
This segment of Scars has been brought to you by Argus. Let's now join Danielle Riviere in Studio A.
So, Dr. Eleni, you had a little bit more you wanted to say about the pedophiles, and
Yes, what I wanted to add is that pedophiles use what we call cognitive distortions in order to allow themselves to continue with the abuse. An example of that would be a minimization. So they would say, I only touched her breast, so that's not really abuse. Or they would use something we call justification. So a justification that a pedophile might use is that it's better for a child to learn about sex from an adult so that they can do it the right way. So these are the kind of things that we try to target in therapy when we work with sexual offenders, because these are the things that maintain the abuse.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the impact on child sexual abuse has on the child, the victim. Dr. Ray.
I think that is also a very deep question, and there's a lot of things that can potentially happen to a child that has been sexually abused or a sexual survivor. I think that one of the things that was told in the initial story by Debbie was that there are so many negative thoughts that happen. They start feeling bad about themselves. They start to feel like there's really nobody out there to support them, that they don't necessarily know where to turn. And a lot of times that can be very, very difficult for a child to deal, especially on their own. So what ends up happening is they end up, looking to substances, looking to other maladaptive or just bad ways to kind of deal with it. Self-harm, even thoughts of suicide. I mean, it really does impact a child quite a bit, especially when they don't have any supports in their lives.
Yes, definitely.
I think the reaction to sexual abuse depends on the support systems to a great extent. Some children cope fairly well because they have a very supportive system around them. Other children who don't have that, unfortunately, don't cope very well, and they go into all these negative behaviors that Dr. Ray has described. But another thing to add is that the sexual abuse reaction is very much like the reaction to grief. So people often go through the same stages. They go through shock, they go through anger, they go through denial, they go through sadness. And in addition to that, they often feel shame and guilt because the perpetrator will try to convince them that part of that is their fault. So when somebody experiences all those negative emotions, it's expected that they will go into maladaptive behaviors as coping strategies, and that's what we see often.
Yes.
Yes, and I just kind of want to chime in on that because I think that when you hit on an important point when you said that they kind of internalize that, you know, this is their fault, and they start to believe that, not just because, you know, it kind of happened, but because a lot of times the sexual perpetrators or the abusers have kind of told them that or given them that story where, you know, this is your fault. If you let anybody know, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And this kind of creates this huge dilemma for a child where they feel uncomfortable, they feel unsafe, and you know, and especially as we know a lot of times that it doesn't just happen once. It can be something that's repeated, and when they don't feel like they can talk or say what's on their mind, and when they don't feel like there's any source out there to really help them, then they can struggle with a lot of internal problems and external ones. Behaviors in the classroom, behaviors in life, and internal struggles.
In Debbie's story and the story that we heard, there was discussion about the fact that as a victim, the things that you go through, the things that impact you. So when you hear about child sexual abuse, there are so many other elements that sometimes you see as a parent. What are some of those signs that you may see as a child acts out?
There's lots of different signs. Any drastic change in a child's behavior, I would say that could be a sign. So some children tend to isolate themselves because they don't want to be in contact with a lot of people. Some children act out. They become very angry. They become aggressive. They cry. They keep other secrets that they don't need to keep from their parents. But also you can see more subtle behaviors such as nail biting all of a sudden, or pulling their hair, or not wanting to talk to anybody. So, and bedwetting. Bedwetting is a very common thing, even when the child is older and you don't expect to see bedwetting at that age. So these are all different signs that we need to be aware of.
Ray, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that she covered it pretty well. I feel like social isolation or just isolating yourself because you don't know who to talk to. I think that's a very big sign. I think that any drastic change in behavior is worthy of kind of investigating as a parent as to why this may be happening. And keeping in mind that it is important to give a child that opportunity to speak without being judged, and important for a parent to understand that they may be saying something that may be hard for them to say.
Okay. So thank you very much. We're actually going to hear from another one of our survivors. This story makes us realize that sometimes a child's behavior can be rooted in years of pain from sexual abuse, and you'll hear in this next story how that pain actually impacts their everyday existence.
My abuser was a friend of a family member. My parents were familiar with him, they trusted him. He played the role of perfect family man, but in reality he was a monster who was stealing my innocence. I was 5 years old when the abuse first began, and it continued until I was about 8. Most weekends he would offer to take me and my younger brother out in the boat fishing, except I didn't get to fish. My brother would fish unknowingly while my abuser forced me to sit on his lap. He would hold me in place with one hand while he roamed my body with the other. I was scared and confused. I didn't understand what was happening to me. Why was he touching me in these places? Why wouldn't he let me go? Why was he praising me for being a good little girl when I felt ashamed of myself? I felt dirty, but I didn't even know why. I was so young I couldn't even comprehend what was happening to me. But as I got older, I began to realize what had actually happened, and the shame grew greater. I was too scared to tell anybody because I was convinced they would blame me. I decided that this was my secret and that I'd never tell a soul. I tried my hardest to suppress the memories. I didn't even want to think about it. But despite how hard I fought during the day, I couldn't control my dreams at night. He haunted me then. When I was about 13, my abuser's stepdaughter called my grandmother to tell her that he had been abusing her for years when she was a child. She told her that she was aware that he had spent time around me when I was younger, and suggested that my grandmother talk to me. I still remember the day she asked me if he had ever touched me. I was consumed with a huge wave of shame. I was so terrified to tell her the truth, I just shook my head and said no. After that, I became even more disgusted with myself. I had validated all my worries. I have done something wrong, and now I have to lie to everybody about it. I felt so alone in this world because nobody knew what I was struggling with. As I grew older, my pain got stronger, and I went into self-destruction mode. I started drinking and partying a lot earlier than my friends, and soon I was hanging out with a completely different crowd. I didn't even know myself anymore. I had even started to become promiscuous. I just wanted to be loved so badly, but I didn't think I deserved it. How could anybody love somebody like me? It was like I had this huge hole in my heart, and I was searching for a way to fill the void in all the wrong places. I hated myself and who I had become. I lived with my secret until I was 17. I was lucky enough to have an unbelievable teacher in my life at the time who saw my pain and saved me from my hell. She approached me one day and told me that she'd been raped as a teenager and saw a lot of the same hate, anger, and pain in me that she had once had in herself. She asked me if there's anything that ever happened to me that I wanted to talk about. I couldn't even answer her. I was so overwhelmed with emotions that all I could do was uncontrollably cry. She saved me that day. She helped me to build up the courage to tell my family and get into therapy. All this time I'd been living life as a victim, allowing my abuse to cripple me. I was ready to take control of my life and to start healing. While that next chapter of my life was not easy, it was unbelievably worth it. I had a lot of suppressed pain that I had to confront. I had forced myself to suppress my memories for so long that I was starting to remember things I hadn't thought about in years. I was experiencing so many emotions at once. Joy that I was on the path of healing, pain that I was reliving my worst memories, anger and shame that it had happened to me. But I was dedicated to take back my power so that I could find inner peace. I have learned that I am not defined by my abuse. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I have learned to forgive my abuser, and not because I want to excuse him for what he did to me, but because I couldn't live with hate in my heart anymore. I have learned to forgive myself because I was an innocent child. There are of course aspects in my life that will never be the same, but I've accepted those things as part of who I am now. I have learned to have more compassion for others than I ever thought humanly possible. Over my journey, I have found a copious amount of love and happiness within my life, but most importantly within myself.
I grew up in the picture-perfect family. I was called the debutante Miss America. I was the first Miss America that they ever brought a family up on stage. My father continued to sexually violate children and teenagers until he died at age 75.
And that's what I feel that was taken from me. My virginity, my youth. You're never the same after that.
What I've heard from people who abuse often is that all the signs were there, but no one bothered to ask them about it.
We have to understand that doing the right thing is not doing the easy thing.
Law enforcement is never going to investigate their way out of these type of crimes, these crimes against children. It's only through prevention that we can help stem the tide.
I feel I had to free myself from feeling guilty, feeling responsible, like I was dirty, who would want me, you know, it's all these things are in your head.
How could somebody do this to me and care about me in any way, shape, or form? I really must be nothing.
And that's what I feel that was taken from me. My virginity, my youth. You're never the same after that.
We have to understand that doing the right thing is not doing the easy thing.
Law enforcement is never going to investigate their way out of these type of crimes, these crimes against children. It's only through prevention that we can help.
This portion of Scars has been brought to you by Buzz. Let's now join Danielle Riviere in Studio A.
Thank you for joining us. So let's talk a little bit about how can being sexually abused as a child impact someone once they're an adult.
Well, if the trauma of sexual abuse is not addressed early enough in therapy, it can have people can be left with serious, deep wounds, and it can be very disabling for their life as adults. So what we see is that people tend to have difficulties functioning in relationships. They have difficulties trusting other people. Sometimes they question their own sexuality. They lose their self-worth. And that's a very difficult thing if you lose your self-worth, because everything else then becomes pointless in life. So they can engage, if you don't have self-esteem, you can engage in behaviors that really are maladaptive.
Definitely. Dr. Ray, do you have anything?
I think about it like this. When you're building a building, the foundation and the first floors is the absolute paramount part of the building. If that isn't stable, that isn't secure, and the rest of the building can be amazing, but your foundation is what holds the building up. It's what keeps the building steady. Your foundation years are so important, and if you shake that, you shake the confidence in your foundation years, you really shake everything else. Everything else is really just as shaky. And I agree, I mean, anything really could be in question. Your understanding of relationships, your ability to be intimate with somebody else, your understanding of what intimacy is, your understanding of how relationships should work, about whether or not sex is supposed to be something special or just something that you do. Is it the only way you show your worth? And there are so many things that adults end up turning to because they don't know their foundation is shaken, and they don't know necessarily how to adjust to that. So really what needs to happen is we need to rebuild that kind of foundation. And I think you wanted to speak to that a little bit.
Yes, I'm currently working with survivors of sexual abuse, adult survivors, a group of adult men, really. And what we see is that people do suffer with anxiety, people suffer with depression, and in some cases they suffer with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So what I've been focusing on in the last 12 months since I've arrived in Bermuda is a new therapeutic intervention, a group therapy intervention, which focuses on survivors of sexual abuse. And it's quite a long intervention. It's 12 months in a group setting. And people get to understand, first of all, to understand sexual abuse and why it has happened to them, and also to start addressing the issues. And we talk about the different emotions involved. We analyze the different emotions involved following sexual abuse. We talk about reactions to victimization. We cover things like society, stigma, sexuality, and when we get to halfway through, probably, we start talking about skills. We start talking about how people will recover and how they will reconstruct themselves, because these are people who feel that they have been damaged. So we look into things like writing letters to the perpetrators, for example, telling people how they feel about what has happened to them, because in most cases people haven't spoken. And when the abuse has been left for so long without having been addressed, it's very difficult to talk about it. People kind of tend to forget how difficult it was for them at the time. So, and we also tend to look away. We don't like to look at the problem. When something is difficult, we tend to look away and not deal with it because it's much easier. And that's what I normally say to people in therapy. Things have to get worse before they can get better. We have to take somebody and completely break them down, completely take them apart, and that is not an easy thing to do, and people sometimes drop out. They can't take it. But for those who stay, the results are really good because they can rebuild themselves. They can understand how they can cope in the future, and that's really good for them.
Dr. Elena, you brought up a great point, the fact that we do have men in this community who have been abused. I think oftentimes we think of child abuse as involving young girls, but the reality is we have a population of young men who have also suffered through this. And Dr. Ray, your description analogy using a building is so true, and the fact that, you know, that building can be standing, that building can look beautiful, but we don't always know what's going on inside. So that is very important points. So doctors, if there's someone out there that is dealing with this issue right now, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to speak up. That's the main thing. And to look for help and to accept what has happened to them and to recognize that this is not their fault. This is the bottom line of it all for me. People have to understand that it is never, ever the survivor's fault. Whatever has happened, and even if the perpetrator has tried to convince them that it is their fault, it is never their fault. And unfortunately, as a society, we deal with the issue as if these people have done something wrong, and survivors have not done anything wrong. They need to speak up, they need to ask for help, but it's down to us to provide that help. You know, if people don't know where to go, and if they don't know that there's help available, they're going to keep quiet, and this is what is going to maintain that cycle of abuse. Because we know from research that 30% of people who have been abused will become perpetrators themselves. So this continues that cycle. You know, if people don't get help, it will never stop.
If I had to speak to somebody who was struggling with this, I would say that I would not imagine, you know, I can't imagine how difficult this must be for them. But I want to use the analogy of going to a hospital. When you go to a hospital and you are struggling with a heart condition and the doctor has to do heart surgery and kind of, you know, open you up and kind of go in there and kind of look and help you, you're under for all of that. You're asleep. You don't see any of it. And the difficulty with therapy is that, well, you're not asleep. You know, you're awake. You see all of it. You literally have to, you know, kind of open you up and kind of see. But if we don't, it would be like going to a doctor and having this problem, saying, "Doctor, I have this problem with my heart," and the doctor looks in there and he says, "Oh my gosh, it's a mess in there. It's really bad," and says, "I don't want to deal with it," and just kind of sews you back up and says, "You know, I'm just not going to deal with it. I'm just going to let you go." And then you said, "You know, doctor, what'd you do?" And you said, it was too scary. I didn't want to deal with it." And honestly, it is that important.
It is.
It is that
important.
important.
It is just that important to make sure that someone seeks help when they need it. It's hard to hear these stories about child abuse, but it's even harder to imagine that someone can suffer over and over again. And our next survivor went through that. She was abused over and over again.
The first perpetrator was my mother's boyfriend. After him, there were several more predators. They were friends of the family. After them, there were 2 extended family members. The predators ranged in age from 18 to about 40. The acts of sexual abuse ranged from being photographed to penetration. Sexual abuse started at the age of 12 and continued until I left home at 16. I was scarred, angry, confused. By the age of 13, I was drinking and getting high and had been hospitalized for a drug overdose. By 15, I had dropped out of school, using drugs and alcohol regularly. I was promiscuous, extroverted. I became indifferent, calloused. By 16, I had left home. I was homeless and I was hungry. By 18, I was battling with anorexia, depression, and suicide. There are no words that can fully explain the destruction of being sexually abused. At the time of the abuse, I was instantaneously filled with shame, fear, and confusion. As a child, it was devastating. It shattered my world. It destroyed everything I knew. I couldn't comprehend why this was happening, why no one was protecting me. As a teenager, I had no boundaries. I didn't know what was or was not acceptable. I believe it was Gary Zukav who said, "To sexually abuse a child is to steal their soul." It has definitely impacted all relationships. I made bad relationship choices. I tolerated physical and emotional abuse. Work relationships were difficult. I struggled with authority. Family relationships were challenging, as these relationships were the ones that allowed these things to happen. My wake-up call was becoming a mother and having children. I knew I had to change the course of my life. I began counseling, parenting classes, reading, talking. I went back to school. Anything I could do or find that would help me to be a better mother and a better person, and give my children a life with unconditional love and safety. It was not an easy journey, but I was not going to allow my children to experience the devastation that I did. I want victims to know it is possible to heal and to live a happy, healthy life, that child sexual abuse does not define us. I want parents to know we have a responsibility and an obligation to be educated about child sexual abuse and to protect our children. I want the community to know and to understand the long-term devastation this crime causes. We must be open about it. We must talk about it. We must educate ourselves and our children. We must become SCAR certified.
I grew up in the picture-perfect family. I was called the debutante Miss America. I was the first Miss America that they ever brought a family up on stage. My father continued to sexually violate children and teenagers until he died at age 75.
And that's what I feel that was taken from me. My virginity, my youth. You're never the same after that.
What I've heard from people who abuse often is that all the signs were there, but no one bothered to ask them about it.
We have to understand that doing the right thing is not doing the easy thing.
Law enforcement is never going to investigate their way out of these type of crimes, these crimes against children. It's only through prevention that we can help stem the tide.
I feel I had to free myself from feeling guilty, feeling responsible, like I was dirty, who would want me, it's all these things are in your head.
How could somebody do this to me and care about me in any way, shape, or form? I really must be nothing.
And that's what I feel that was taken from me. My virginity, my youth. You're never the same after that.
We have to understand that doing the right thing is not doing the easy thing.
Law enforcement is never going to investigate their way out of these type of crimes, these crimes against children. It's only through prevention that we can help.
This segment of SCARS has been brought to you by Validus Holding. Let's now join Danielle Riviere in Studio A.
So there may be someone out there who these stories are touching you and are putting you in a position where you may need to reach out and talk to someone. And we are very grateful to have a telephone number for you to call, 239-6344. That's 239-6344. This number will be open until 9:30 this evening. And if anyone out there needs to talk to someone, that's the number you should call, 239-6344. So, doctors, as we continue to really look at how this issue is impacting the victims and the survivors, I want to talk a little bit broader about our community and how child sexual abuse can have an impact on everyone out there.
The impact is huge actually on the community because we tend to live in a community of fear We don't want to live in fear. We don't want to be stopping our children from playing outside. We don't want to be stopping them from going to do sports. We don't want to be worrying about everybody, every adult that speaks to them. So fear and lack of trust in our society is going to be the outcome if the sexual abuse continues the way it is at the moment. And nobody wants to live in a society where fear is the main element. Because that's damaging for the children too. And also there's the financial cost. The criminal justice system, we tend to not to think about that. The perpetrators that, will have to be processed. Courts, prisons, judges, social workers, psychologists, everybody who's going to be involved. But the financial impact is nothing compared to the emotional impact to creating a society of fear, anxiety, and lack of trust amongst its members.
The best type of intervention is prevention, and it's very important that the community be aware of that this is a real thing, that this is something that we do as a community need to come together and kind of understand. It is something that we need to talk about. It's something that we need to be educated on, because as a community, we can really turn around how this thing works. I think that education and being aware that this is a concern, that we do need to be prepared but not scared of what this issue brings to the table. I think that with the knowledge in schools, with the knowledge of our proper professionals, with our parents, with our people especially people that are in regular contact of children, we can turn around how this thing works and really stop this thing on the front end, rather than having to deal with everything on the back end, where we're having to do interventions, where we're having to do, putting people in treatment centers and prisons and all that kind of stuff. We can really turn around and really kind of stop how this is kind of viewed as something on the back end, as opposed to being prevented.
Sometimes I ask members of my family, or ask my friends, what do you think it would be like if your child was sexually abused? And they respond with horror. They don't want to think about it. In fact, they say, I don't even want to think about that. And we stop thinking, we look away. But that's the wrong thing to do. We have to think about it, because our children could be next. And that's the sad reality. Maybe it hasn't happened to us yet, and we tend to think that it doesn't concern me. It hasn't happened to me. It hasn't happened to my family, so it doesn't concern me. Don't ask me questions like that, because I can't even think about it. Well, this is what we have to think about, because we could be next. We can't continue this denial and this avoidance of the problem.
And I think that's one of the things that SCARS really tries to do. I think that they really try to give parents a way to kind of talk about it. I mean, one of the things that I like to, inform all parents about, that I know the SCARS training kind of does, is to look at, how to introduce this topic, how to tell your child that, it's not safe for somebody to touch you in an area that's covered by your bathing suit. To properly name the body parts of the individual, to make sure that they understand that they can come to them when somebody makes them feel uncomfortable, when somebody makes them feel unsafe, and that they won't get in trouble. This is important, that they won't get in trouble for this, because that's one of the biggest things that child abusers and sexual abusers tell them. If you tell anybody, you're going to get in trouble. They're going to be still angry at you. But if you build this idea in your child that, no matter how angry I am at you, no matter how frustrated you may be, whatever mistakes you think you make, I will always love you, and I will always care for you, and I will always work through with you, whatever happens. You'll have a child that, even if someone says that to them, they'll say, my mom's really somebody who really cares for me, and I think that even if I tell them this, they won't judge me for it. And you'll have a child that will be able to speak up for themselves. And then they'll learn that, it wasn't their fault. It's important that parents tell them, it's not your fault. It's not something that you could have changed. It is something that the parents need to be aware of so they can properly protect you. It is something that it's important for parents to know that when you hear this, that you want to control your own emotions to make sure that you don't get overwhelmed with anger or upset. And it would be perfectly human to feel that way, but it's important to tell your child that you're proud of them for coming forward about this, because it is important for them to feel like there's a place or a person that you can talk to and be safe with. And that's what I really want, the community to understand.
And children think that they should always listen to what the adults say, because that's what we tell them to do. We tell them, do as you're told. Adults know best, and that's what they expect to do. But that's sometimes wrong, because the perpetrator could be telling them that this is the right thing to do. So how do we talk about that to our children? How do we explain to them that sometimes if you feel uncomfortable, maybe you have to talk about it? It's not always that the adult is right.
You guys made some excellent points. I think that SCARS is definitely at the forefront of education, and that's what it takes. After attending the training, I realized just the simple language of, if anyone did anything to my child, I'd kill them. How that can shut down a child, and that was a learning experience for me, because I'm definitely one of those parents that says I protect my cub, So that's very important information that you guys have shared. And I think that for the community, it's also to definitely understand that we have to come forward, and we have to be a part of the solution by educating our young people, our children. And you made a great point that if we create an environment where young people understand that they're loved and that they have the ability to talk to us, that we stop part of the issue right there. So thank you guys very much for that. And one other question that I want to ask is, how can the reaction of people, oftentimes we hear that people are not admitting that they are being sexually abused because of their reaction. So as a community, as adults, we still hear that people don't want to address this. So as an adult who is not just interacting with children, but interacting with other adults, how do we start these conversations?
Well, we need to embrace people who have been survivors of sexual abuse. We need to openly talk about it. We need to stop being ashamed about it, because people will not talk about it if that's our reaction. It has to be the same thing as physical injury. Emotional injury, sexual injury is the same as physical injury. We expect and we demand that there will be treatment. We expect to have the best experts to treat our injury when it comes to physical illness, and why shouldn't we expect the same? And people have responsibility, government has responsibility as they provide treatment for physical injuries in a hospital with all the appropriate equipment, with all the experts. The same should happen for sexual injury, and we tend to forget that. And I think it's partly because you can't see the emotional hurt. When you see somebody with a broken arm or a broken leg or an injury on their face and blood everywhere, you can see it, you can understand it. People say, I'm in pain, look at my injury, and you can see it, so it's easy to treat that. When people have a psychological injury, an emotional injury as the outcome of sexual abuse, we don't understand it. We can't see it. We can't see the extent of it. But, if you think about the fact that people actually hurt themselves physically, and I'm talking about self-harm, self-injury, to forget about the emotional pain that they have from sexual abuse, it means that actually the emotional abuse is much more severe, much more unbearable. And that's why people will hurt themselves physically, or they will drink, or they will take drugs to forget the emotional pain. And yet we do very little for the emotional pain.
So we'll be right back just after this short break.
I grew up in the picture-perfect family. I was called the debutante Miss America. I was the first Miss America that they ever brought a family up on stage. My father continued to sexually violate children and teenagers until he died at age 75.
And that's what I feel that was taken from me. My virginity, my youth. You're never the same after that.
What I've heard from people who abuse often is that all the signs were there, but no one bothered to ask them about it.
We have to understand that doing the right thing is not doing the easy thing.
Law enforcement is never going to investigate their way out of these type of crimes, these crimes against children. It's only through prevention that we can help stem the tide.